pieces, and the first one that I'll play is by Catherine Hoover. It's called Coco Pele, which is the Indian god of music and also fertility, and he's known as sort of a jokester god as well.
For our opening prayer here, I have picked out an excerpt from Howard Thurman, and it's in a poem that he has, Our Little Lives. Our little lives, our big problems, these we place upon thy altar. Brood over our spirits, our Father, blow upon whatever dream thou hast for us, that there may glow once again upon our hearts the light from thy altar. Pour out upon us whatever our spirits need of shock, of lift, of release, that we may find strength for these days, courage and hope for tomorrow. In confidence we rest in thy sustaining grace, which makes possible triumph in defeat, gain in loss, and love in hate. We rejoice this day to say, our little lives, our big problems, these we place upon thy altar. Amen. And now for special music with
Adagio in B minor by Joachim Anderson.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think it's my turn now. Um, thank you all so much for inviting me to come back and spend time with you. I very much enjoyed the last time we were visiting together. I'm going to start my talk this morning with a reading from the Bible from Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. And it states, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rains fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and they slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall. For it had been built founded on rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rains fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell. And it fell with greatness." I don't know about you, but I know that I have been in major observation of so many changes that are going on in our universe right now. And it's almost like I'm afraid to go to sleep at night because there's going to be some new something or other that's going to be happening tomorrow morning. And I was looking through some of the books I had on my shelf, and I came across a book that was written by the Reverend Dr. Dennis Merritt Jones. And he was a metaphysical minister. He was a member of the Center for Spiritual Living, or still is a member. He is not doing church full time anymore. He's writing books. And I came across his book called The Art of Being. And in it, Dr. Dennis reminds us that the life of God expresses itself by means of each one of us. Each one of us is one with that power of God, with that life of God. And this is a universal truth. When we build our lives on a solid foundation of this truth, our lives are unshakable. Our lives are stable. We are able to handle the winds of life. Dr. Dennis writes, "Shifting sand is a metaphor for an undisciplined mind. A mind which is focused on egoic needs, which change daily. A mind that thinks in terms of duality and the instant gratification that the material world promises, and that is temporal at best." I know I spent a lot of years in Hollywood, and one of the things that I discovered about Hollywood was that it was temporal at best. I know that we had the saying that you weren't anybody. You had not achieved any sort of recognition or creative acknowledgement unless you've been fired at least once. So things changed all the time. And what I got to understand is that life changes, but I don't have to. There's a central focus that I get to maintain. Now, we understand that it is up to us to create our own individual relationship with Spirit. God has presented us a table with absolutely everything on it. It is up to us to get up out of the chair, go over, and take those things that we require to create that life that we would love to live. It is up to us to go forth and choose those things that support us in building a strong foundation. My mother was an elementary school teacher. And one of the stories, many children's stories that I heard her tell often, was the story of the three little pigs. Now, we all know the story of the three little pigs. And we know that they all had to create some means of protection because the big bad wolf was after them. So they all decided to build a shelter. And the first pig, he built his shelter. He gathered up some straw and he threw up a shelter. And after he threw that up, he's like, okay, guys, let's go out and play. So the second pig, of course, he grabbed up a bunch of sticks and he built a shelter. And he goes, okay, I'm ready. Let's go out and play. Well, then the third pig, they went to the third pig who had managed to obtain some bricks. And he was meticulously building his house from these bricks. He was constantly being interrupted by the other two pigs going, come on, come on, come on, let's go out and play. Let's go out and play. You can do that later. And he refused. He said, no, I'm completing this now. And so he continued to work on his house. Well, we all know the ending of the story, that the big bad wolf showed up and he went to the first house and he huffed and he puffed and he blew that straw house down. And then he went to the second house with the sticks and he huffed and he puffed and he blew that house down. Meanwhile, the first two little pigs were running to the third house to get in and shut the door. And the wolf huffed and he puffed and he did not blow that house down. It took that focus and that meticulous care to build a strong foundation upon which all three of those pigs were able to survive. I know when I was living in California, the church I was in, we all decided that we wanted to remodel the space. That when it was originally set up, it wasn't originally a church. And so we own that building space now. And it was like, well, okay, let's see if we can create a better space in which to work. So we hunted down architects and we had them render some drawings. And we finally chose the drawing that we liked. We managed to obtain financing, and let me tell you, that one was a big miracle. So we were very grateful for that. And then we went about getting our permits and hiring our subcontractors, and all this stuff was proceeding nicely. Until one day, the county inspector came into the building and informed us that the foundation on our building had been there for years, and it needed to be earthquake retrofitted up to the standards of the year 2002, as we were doing the building. And we were all looking at each other going, oh, really? Well, of course, that's not necessarily something you're going to know until you take the building apart. So they had knocked all the walls down, things were all gutted, and we're standing there, and this guy's saying, well, got to get the retrofitting done. And of course, that was a financial shocker. That was another $40,000 that we had to come up with from somewhere. So after we did a lot of praying and a lot of financial counseling and working, we managed to get that done, and because we had to go forward because the walls were gone. So we moved forward. We had our sanctuary and our building remodeled. We were in love with what we had completed. And just before they put the carpet down in the sanctuary, everybody got a black Sharpie pen, and we did a blessing. And everybody was invited to come and write down some blessings on the floor, the foundation of our sanctuary, before we covered it up with the carpet. So we had a great time. We didn't leave one blank space on that foundation that wasn't covered with a blessing. So we did what we needed to do to create a foundation upon which we could grow. Each of us has the opportunity to do this process of creating a stronger foundation. And one other thing that happened after we remodeled the church was about a year later, we were all sitting in a class in our classroom area, and we had an earthquake. And so the tables were shaking and the room was shaking and people were getting nervous, and then it stopped. And I looked up, I said, what are you guys all upset about? I said, we just got this place retro. This is the safest building in the city. So let's us take a breath, let's us give thanks, and let's us keep going with class. So we had that opportunity to experience living on that foundation, earthquakes and all. So Dr. Dennis, in his book, he asked us to take a look at our lives as if they were a house. And he asked us to think, well, what type of foundation would you build? What would it look like? How many rooms would you have? What would they be used for? How much time would you spend in each room? He said, think of the foundation as God's presence, and that each room is an aspect of your life. He said, one room might be relationships. One room might be physical health. Another might be work. And then another, spiritual growth. So we get to realize it is the same foundation that supports each and every room. For God is everywhere present. And as we create our individualized relationship and strengthen our spiritual awareness and growth, we are retrofitting the house. We're retrofitting the foundation. There is no more God in one room than there is in another. When we're aware of this this very area of our lives, when we are aware of this, that God is everywhere present, our foundation becomes unshakable. We become unshakable. I know that when I was in ministerial school, and as I was growing in my spiritual strength and my spiritual awareness, and I got serious about it after I had to go through a chronic illness. And I remember asking one day, or making this statement really, that I didn't have an understanding now of how people got through the stuff we have to deal with in life without a solid foundation. I mean, things happen. People unfortunately lose their children through death, and we move through illness, and we move through changing times and loss of jobs and all these sort of things. And that day I stood in my own thoughts thinking, how do people survive without a solid spiritual foundation? So I kept that question in my mind as I moved through my spiritual growth and my ministerial education. And a life built on the consciousness and awareness of God's presence in every room makes the entire house stable. So if we're having the challenges in our relationships, that we have the wherewithal and the strength of spirit to allow spirit to guide, direct, inspire, prosper, and bless us through the appearance of the ugly stuff. We can begin to be in that place of bearing witness to how fast things change, and to bear witness to how we can, one step at a time, heal that which requires healing, emotionally, relationship-wise, physically, spiritually. We all have an opportunity in how to create a healthy and safe environment for ourselves by operating from a strong foundation. Now, I know we've all had to make adjustments here of late, and how we're able to execute the things going on in our lives. Everything from how we vote, the mechanics of it, to dealing with the changes on how we're able to educate our children, and how we're able to proceed forward in our life's work. Because I know this morning we were talking to Dave, and he was saying, well, I've never had to play on Zoom before. Okay, well, here we are. And he's done a magnificent job. And so we know that there is a strong foundation there for Dave, knowing and understanding and having clarity about his gifts to this world. So Dr. Dennis asks us to take a few minutes, and he offers a few suggestions on how we can stay mindful of building on a strong foundation. And he asks us to re-examine that foundation. Do we have a strong foundation? Do we have a strong spiritual practice that we can engage in every day that reinforces our awareness of being a magnificent, individualized expression of God? I mean, I know there are those days that I wake up and think, okay, now how useless am I feeling today? And I have to take a minute to allow myself to feel useless so that I can get over that. And then I can get to sit down and say, okay, now I get to move into that place of understanding by settling, by being quiet, and by knowing the truth. One thing I discovered is that God does not make junk. So therefore, each and every one of our lives is here for a purpose. We're here to provide something only each and every one of us can provide. So I have to get myself together and I have to say, okay, fine. I am a magnificent, individualized expression of spirit. And so I strengthen that room in my house. I move on to my work and I think, okay, I've got to put together a talk or I've got to put together a class. Oh man, am I going to be able to do this? And I get to stop and say, I am a magnificent spiritual expression of God. So my creativity is allowed to flow. So we get to take a moment to look at that and be aware and reinforce our awareness of our gifts. We get to take a look at each room in our house. We get to keep up with each room. I know I have a housekeeper that comes in here to help me. And she moves through each room with clarity, focus, ease, and grace. She has a pattern. She knows how she's doing it. She knows what she's doing. She takes care of everything in each room. And I get to ask myself, well, do I get to go through the rooms in my spiritual house? How am I working my relationships? How am I creating relationships given the circumstances under which we're living these days? How am I creating work? Am I expressing myself creatively? Am I working on my health? Today I got up and I wasn't feeling so totally healthy. So I say to myself, all right, I get to work on that health aspect of my house. And the first thing I did was knowing full well that I'm making it through this service with clarity, focus, ease, and grace. And that's what's taking place. We get to ask ourselves, do we need any retrofitting in any room that we have? And we get to recognize how much God's presence is alive and well. If we discover any imbalance, we get to focus on what it is that we need to do to shift that, to reaffirm the spiritual magnificence. Just like that third little pig who meticulously built his house of brick, we must know that if our houses are of a solid foundation, no one and no thing can huff and puff and blow it down. There's nothing to be afraid of. As we see our political environment changing, as we see how we do our work changing, as we see how we educate our kids changing, as we see how we're doing church changing. None of these changes get to huff and puff and blow our house down. So I leave you with some words from Reverend Dr. Ernest Holmes, who's the founder of religious science. And he wrote, "The wise man builds his house on a solid rock of truth and not on the shifting sands of instability. He measures cause by effects and estimates reality by that which is real and enduring. The foolish man, living only in sense perception, has no measure for reality and builds his home on false and erroneous concepts. The vicissitudes, which means natural changing and visible changes of nature, of fortune, upset his frail building. The edifice falls about him. Truth alone endures." So know with me now that you live your life on a solid foundation. Your life is built on that rock of spirit, on the truth that you are a magnificent, individualized expression of all that God is now and forevermore. And to know with me that with God, all things are possible. And so it is. Join me now as we move into meditation. And we know right here and now that Father, Mother, God is everywhere present. Father, Mother, God lives and expresses itself in and through and as each one of us. For God needs us to express itself. So as we take a deep breath, we get to feel our oneness with Spirit. We get to feel that infinite connection that is always and ever present, supporting us through all things. And we know right here and right now that God is in the middle of everything. When it appears we have fires burning in the west, God is in the middle of that. When we are dealing with hurricanes in the south, God is in the middle of that. When we're dealing with our own personal, individual challenges with health and relationships and creativity, God is in the middle of that. So join me now here in these few moments of silence to feel your connection to that foundation of spiritual truth that lives and supports you in all that you do. Thank you, Spirit, for this day. Thank you, Spirit, for this gathering, for each and every loving life that dressed up and showed up today to experience this community that we know to be the Unity Center of DC. Each of us continues to move forward in our lives, living on a solid foundation, creating from that love of God that expresses by means of us, and knowing that no matter what anything looks like, God is in charge and all is well. I joyfully release these words now that have been spoken into the divine law of God and the divine love of mine, knowing they are already done and complete. As we say together, amen.
So the next piece that I'm playing is called Winter Spirits. It is also by Kathleen Hoover. She was a flutist, and she was a fabulous flutist too. Basically, a lot of her pieces really stem from her interest in Native American music. So this piece, Winter Spirits, has some really interesting sounds in it. I hope you enjoy it.
and to say. This is a poem by Hafiz, one of my favorites. I've shared a lot of his poems in the past, and it's translated by Daniel Ladinsky, and it's called I Have Learned So Much. I have learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew. The truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman, an angel, or even pure soul. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely, it has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known. Amen.